If you're interested in review series with happy endings, you would be better off watching some other channel. In this series, not only is there no happy ending, there is no happy beginning, and very few happy things in the middle. This realization is inevitable when documenting the life and thoughts of Lexi the Lorekeeper, a trans woman who has decided to dip her toes into the YouTube game by doing a video essay, a phrase which here means a thorough dissection of the topic in question in order to make a case for her general thesis statement. Said topic is a series of unfortunate events, one of, if not her favorite book series, and the two different adaptations that attempted to bring the story into a visual medium. Along the way, the viewer is sure to encounter all the various fine distinctions that make this retrospective so repulsive, including austere analysis, tedious takes, catastrophic comparisons, dismal digressions, a vile verdict, and bunny ears. My name is Citrusy Snickersnack, and while starting this video off with a Lemony Snicket parody may be considered cliché, cliché is a word which here means done by so many YouTubers reviewing this franchise that it is no longer considered funny anymore, I promise you, it is nothing compared to the misery and despair that you will be privy to as you progress through this review series. Unless you are able to handle all the previously mentioned horrors, I urge you to look away. Well, another day. Another chance to geek out. This is really heavy, actually. I fucking love A Series of Unfortunate Events. While I didn't read that much of it as a kid and mainly knew about it through the Jim Carrey movie at the time, it was in the early 2010s when I got the box set of the books as a Christmas present. I jumped right into binging the entire series as soon as I could, and my love for them has only grown since then. My feelings on the movie are a bit more complicated, but I'll get to that in a minute. For those who aren't aware, A Series of Unfortunate Events, written by Jewish author Daniel Handler under the pen name Lemony Snicket, stars the Baudelaire children, the inventor Violet, the bookworm Klaus, and the sharp-toothed baby Sonny, who end up losing their parents and home in an enormous fire, and so with the guidance of banker Mr. Poe, who's been left in charge of their fortune and isn't especially helpful, they get placed in the care of Count Olaf, a greedy man who he quickly discovers hell-bent on getting his hands on said Baudelaire fortune. As the Baudelaires proceed to thwart his plans and expose him, they get taken from guardian to guardian, with Olaf always showing up in a disguise with a new plan. As this formula plays out in each entry, the orphans learn more about a secret organization connected to everything terrible that's happened in their lives, leading to twists and turns and revelations and all that good stuff. Recently, I'd had the urge to reread the series for the first time in years, not just to see how they held up, but also to fully prepare myself for a revisit of the Netflix adaptation. I was there to binge every season of the show the day they dropped, and it was an experience that I still hold dear to my heart. With the 2004 film only covering the first 3 books, it excited me to no end to get an adaptation that got to tell the entire story this time, and bring it to an audience that probably hadn't experienced the source material, or only knew about it thanks to the movie. Truth be told, I wasn't even doing this whole unfortunate events binge so I could do a full review of it. It was mainly for myself, just a nerd wanting to indulge in pieces of media that I adore just for fun. That being said, in the process, I had an excellent idea for what could be my proper return to YouTube. A soft reboot for me, if you will. See, it wasn't until I was a good ways into my marathon at the Netflix show that I realized, holy shit, this is like everything a great adaptation should do. And I don't just mean in adapting the original books. I mean when it comes to translating a literary work to a visual medium, especially a story as tonally distinct as Unfortunate Events, the Netflix version checks all the boxes needed to make it great and then some. And so, that's what I'm going to be doing today. I'm going to go over each goal a good adaptation should strive to reach, and talk about how Netflix's A Series of Unfortunate Events excels in all of them. That's not to say it's flawless. There are a couple of changes here and there that do make me raise an eyebrow, but as far as I'm concerned, those changes are little more than inconsequential oversights, and the positives more than outweigh any little negatives I do have. Plus, it gives me a chance to gush about one of my favorite shows, and I can never say no to that. But before we get to the show itself, yeah, may as well cover the elephant in the room. Part 0. A short preamble about the movie. Now, chances are you're aware of the movie adaptations, so I don't need to go into everything that makes it so disappointing, like its troubled production, a change in directors, an unfitting format, a misguided cast, and studio interference. Why did I say it like that? But chances are also good that some of you don't know, so what the hell, might as well go over it. While the books were in the process of getting the story out, Paramount and Nickelodeon had begun work on a film adaptation, which ended up coming out in 2004 and starred Jim Carrey as Count Olaf. Barry Sonnenfeld was originally set to direct, but ended up leaving the project for reasons I'll get to, with Brad Silberling taking up the mantle instead. The reception to the movie was positive to mixed, and while it certainly made money, it just wasn't enough to warrant any more unfortunate events movies being made. Way back in the days when I reviewed stuff on DeviantArt, I did a review for this movie, and it's actually one of very few of my older reviews that I'm still quite proud of. If you're one of my longtime followers that did read it, you would know that I'm not the biggest fan of this film. I do have quite a bit of nostalgia for it, having seen it countless times as a kid, and I can certainly give it credit for a number of things. The set design is damn impressive, not only managing to translate the various locations from the page to the screen rather flawlessly, but maintaining a sort of Tim Burton esque neo Gothic architecture that really fits the source material. The score is also downright exquisite, fitting the whimsical yet somber tone during the quieter moments and really selling the more action heavy sequences. So, when it comes to the aesthetics and the presentation, I've basically got no complaints. I can also praise them managing to work in little details and references that only fans of the books would recognize. The first minute is a particular highlight. The Littlest Elf is a very cutesy story that only gets brought up in passing in Book the Seventh, and it gets a full on stop motion sequence contributing to the "this isn't the miserable story you'll actually be experiencing" kind of opening that the books are known for. There's also a scene set near the Last Chance General Store, a location that only appears in Book the Eighth. This kind of attention to detail tells me that the people behind this really did care and want to make the best adaptation possible, so I can't be too mad at it at all. That being said, however, this is one of those adaptations that feels like it was hit with a number of studio notes and troubled production, and you can tell in the final product. The movie attempts to take the first three books in the series and condense them into a single three-act story, which in and of itself presents problems. Granted, it could have turned out a lot worse. This is nowhere near the levels of something like M. Night Shyamalan's The Last Airbender, but that doesn't negate its issues. Due to how the movie is structured, the bad beginning ends up getting the most screen time dedicated to it, with the reptile room and the wide window having to be stripped to the bare basics. With the books being more of an episodic series, the movie attempts to get around this by concocting the train sequence, giving enough of a reason for Mr. Poe to get the Baudelaires away from Count Olaf for a time. Not a bad idea on paper, and the sequence itself is a good showcase for all the Baudelaires working together to get out of danger, one of the big recurring themes throughout the series. But it's a symptom of the aforementioned structural issues, indicating that trying to squeeze three books in this way wasn't the route to take. Speaking of the Baudelaires working together, that's another thing the movie tends to botch, mainly a symptom of having to condense the story like this. Unlike in the books, where each of the orphans would end up contributing to thwarting Olaf in some way, expressing the idea of unity in the face of danger, the movie tends to have Klaus do the work, with Violet and Sunny's contributions coming few and far between. As such, I wouldn't be blamed if someone came to the conclusion that Klaus is the de facto leader, which isn't exactly what you want in a story where they're supposed to be working together. The casting is mostly solid, I'll admit, managing to translate the characters to screen well enough, with one exception. Yeah, it's time I talk about Jim Carrey. Since I reviewed this movie several years back, I've gotten the chance to see The Truman Show, so I know for a fact that Jim is capable of pulling off a more dramatic performance with flying colors, and the recent Sonic the Hedgehog movies have proven to more modern audiences that he's also able to sell a more comedic character as well when he's got a good writer and director behind him, so I don't blame him for how his Count Olaf performance turned out. Part of the reason Barry Sonnenfeld left the project was because of the higher ups wanting to push Jim Carrey's performance up more, mainly having him play his comedic side more. I criticized it way back when, and I'm sorry to say that my opinion on it hasn't changed much. Count Olaf in the books could be comedic at times for sure, but it's really his attitude throughout that makes those moments work. Even when the books decided to play up his ego or his lack of knowledge on literature, he still maintains some level of dignity in the way it plays off, which in turn makes it even funnier. I do not get that from Jim Carrey's performance at all. Instead of a villain that manages to maintain a sense of confidence and menace even as his ignorance is honed in on, I just see a flamboyant and awkward weirdo that just so happens to be evil. Jim Carrey played his heart out here, but he just needed the proper direction. So, TLDW for this section, the movie was a valiant effort to bring the source material to the big screen, and it's honestly a miracle it turned out as watchable as it did. But had they waited for all the books to come out first so they would know where the story was going and given the original director more creative freedom, it could have been a legitimately good film that brought both book fans and newcomers a worthwhile experience. Well, wouldn't you know it, leave it to Netflix to give Barry Sonnenfeld much more creative freedom to get his fully realized vision out, having the benefit of the entire book series having been out to be able to adapt them properly, make it into a TV show format rather than movies, and end up with a significantly better product. Let's talk about that now, shall we? Part 1. Capturing the spirit of the source material. This is really the main thing you would need to get right when bringing a creative work into a different medium. Whether you're adapting a video game into a movie or whatever, you have to demonstrate that you know, get the thing that you're adapting. A series of unfortunate events not only has a uniquely morbid tone compared to other children's stories, but is the only one that comes to mind that utilized reverse psychology when it comes to marketing itself. Not only does the back of each book have a letter from Lemony Snicket advising you not to read it, but when you actually decide to read it, you're hit here and there with Snicket warning you about the misery and woe that the story contains and recommending you stop if you can't handle depressing endings. It's a far cry from how you'd expect a children's book to sell itself, but it gives the impression that the author is aware of the phrase, you tell a kid not to do something and they're going to want to do it even more, and decided to use it to his advantage. Netflix's take on the story keeps the series' tone perfectly intact, feeling consistently like a show that's both absurdist and whimsical, as well as not shying away from the harsher aspects of life. Take the character Aunt Josephine, for example. Unfortunate Events is the kind of universe where a woman who's constantly racked by fear and paranoid over worst case scenarios also happens to live in a house that's almost all the way over the edge of a cliff, only just barely held up by stilts attached to said cliff. Visually, it's a perfect representation of who Aunt Josephine is as a person, as well as always giving you an ever-present feeling of tension as the house is on the verge of collapsing. But the design itself is also outlandish enough to remind you, oh yeah, this is a work of fiction. Oh yeah, and that reverse psychology aspect I mentioned before, that gets worked into every single episode, not just with Lemony Snicket popping up and occasionally requesting you watch something else, but the theme song for the show itself, appropriately titled Look Away. The song itself is an absolute banger of a theme, and it essentially acts as a stand-in for those Dear Reader notes at the back of each book, outright saying that the show will wreck your evening, your whole life, and your day, and that every episode is nothing but dismay. It's also one of those themes that has a little change for every episode. There's a verse in the middle that serves as a short synopsis for what you're about to see, and said verse changes depending on the book they're adapting. On top of that, because Neil Patrick Harris plays Count Olaf and sings the theme song, and the fact that each book, aside from the last one, is split into 2 episodes, then part 2 has that particular verse sung in whatever strange voice Olaf is using for his disguise in that entry. This is the kind of attention to detail that I can never get enough of. And yes, you heard me right. Almost every book in the series was split into 2 episodes, with their respective length ranging from around 40 minutes to over an hour. In sharp contrast to the movies squeezing in multiple books into an hour and 40 minutes, Netflix opted instead to give each book around that same length of time, ensuring that they have plenty of time to get the story across and get it properly fleshed out. That might sound excessive given how short the books are, but having reread them just before rewatching the show, there are a couple of reasons why I think it really works here. One I'll get to in the next section, and the other is that, despite their length, a lot happens in each book, to the point where they can feel like more than one at times. It makes sense to ensure that they include all the important events and making sure they translate well to screen. The strange yet captivating tone of the books is also due in part to the dialogue and how the characters play off each other. The way the characters talk always feels just a little stilted and just a little off from how we would talk to each other in the real world. While this would normally be a criticism, this is a case where it actually works to its benefit. Because everyone talks like this, you kind of end up buying that this is just part of how this world operates, and it ends up becoming part of the series' weird charm. Having that be carried over to a visual medium is tricky due to general audiences likely not being accustomed to this manner of speaking, but because everything else was nailed, the dialogue and line delivery works in concert with it all, and it really turns into a show that truly gets its source material. It understands the tone, the absurdist setting, the morbid humor, and the character dynamics that made the source material so excellent. When we get moments of the Baudelaires reminiscing about their parents, or Count Olaf doing his Count Olaf thing, or Lemony Snicket utilizing his bizarre yet well-articulated defining of words and phrases, I always think, yes, Barry Sonnenfeld gets it. But wait, you might be asking, okay, that's all great, but is this show just a carbon copy of the books? To that I say, hell no, bitch, and you should be ashamed of yourself for even saying such a thing to me. I am so sorry, I can't believe I wrote that. If that were the case, then there'd really be no point watching the show, right? Yes, the show nails everything that made the book so great, but that's not the only thing I'd say is needed for a truly great adaptation. And one of the other things is Part 2, providing something unique, parentheses, and good to the fans. Now, this may be a hot take, but when it comes to adaptations, I have to say I agree with Shea Frillis Productions in his review of Shrek the Musical. I'm one of those weirdos that prefers there to be substantial changes or improvements to justify the adaptation being made. I totally get the appeal of just wanting to stick to the original as closely as possible, but unless the people making it are bringing something unique to the table to make itself stand out, then as far as I'm concerned, there's little point in seeing the version on screen. If I wanted the original story, I already have that ready for me whenever I'm in the mood for it. As much as I love Zack Snyder's Watchmen, for example, the fact it stuck as close as it did to the graphic novel kind of makes it egregious is all. Thankfully, Netflix's A Series of Unfortunate Events doesn't fall into that trap, and this is where we get into the biggest fundamental change between the two versions, and the second reason the episodes are split up the way they are. Lemony Snicket is narrating both stories, of course, but when it comes to the characters he focused on, he kept the perspective restricted to that of the Baudelaires in the books. This made it so that the readers can follow their footsteps from beginning to end as they discover more and more all the secrets and conspiracies taking part in their lives. Like the Baudelaires, the reader is the outsider looking into all this complex and morally ambiguous stuff. And so this bizarre world we're reading about and the story the orphans are undertaking manage to feel even larger than we could really comprehend. This helps feed into one of the main overarching themes of the story, the fact that there's always another side to consider, that your actions may not really be as noble as you think they are, and that the nature of the world is much more layered and complicated than what's going on in your own life. Netflix's version certainly broadens the scope of things, to put it in one way. Rather than narrowing in on the Baudelaire's experiences the entire time, the show opts for a more well-rounded and third-person perspective on everything. We may cut away from the orphans to have a scene dedicated to Count Olaf and his henchmen, or to Mr. Poe and his wife, or to an original character that the show concocted. If you've only seen the show, it might surprise you to learn that Jacqueline, the character that much of the secret organization's side plot revolves around, is a 100% original Netflix edition. As the orphans are indulging in what the original book focuses on, Jacqueline is finding ways to help them behind the scenes and trying to get a special book to them that would answer all their questions. In many cases, this kind of addition would be more of a criticism against an adaptation. Part of why Peter Jackson's Hobbit trilogy failed is that they were adding so much bloat while trying to adapt a very short book into 3 very long movies. So why does it bother me when those movies did this kind of thing, but I don't have a problem with it here? Well, there's a few reasons. For one, the Hobbit trilogy was trying to act as a prequel to The Lord of the Rings, trying to work in appearances from Legolas, Saruman, Galadriel, Sauron, and the like, and it got to the point where the original Hobbit story got lost in the shuffle. Netflix's Unfortunate Events doesn't have that drawback, making sure that these side plots actually feed into the main one to some degree. It's not acting as if it's also an expansion to Lemony Snicket, the unauthorized autobiography, or the Beatrice letters, with the main plot also being there as a separate thing. It is still very much this story, just more of it. Second, the Hobbit films, including all those Lord of the Rings elements, didn't seem to be there for any particular purpose other than pandering to nostalgia. Yeah, seeing Legolas do his Legolas things is guaranteed to get the fans giddy for a bit, but once you realize that it's severely distracting from the main story we're supposed to care about, that's when it goes too far into unnecessary territory. With Unfortunate Events, this approach actually feeds into another strong positive the show has going for it, but it's also one I can see being a bit of a deal breaker for some. By the end of the original books, many of the bigger questions readers have been asking themselves were kept unanswered, the solutions left purposefully ambiguous. Which of the central characters lived or died, exactly what was in the sugar bowl that was so important, whether or not the Baudelaires are even alive after all of this, left unanswered. In contrast, because the show's perspective is more omniscient and far reaching, we end up getting a lot of the answers that readers have been pondering over for several years. Your mileage is going to vary based on which one you prefer. Do you prefer more mystery or more explanation? As for me, I do generally prefer how the books handled it, since one of the major themes is the fact that life is full of uneasy answers, and chances are you'll never get answers to some burning questions. In keeping with the vibe of the rest of the series, it's a harsh reality to let sink in, especially for the kids reading it. But whether those questions ever got answered or not, there's that ever present sense of hope that comes from the Baudelaires. They go through so much horrible shit in the series and even do some horrible shit, but by the end, their connections with each other and that tiny bit of optimism for the future is what keeps them going. It's a central piece of the original story, and it's a big reason why I still love the books to this day. So, with that in mind, having a version that gives answers to these questions kinda muddles that, right? Well, I wouldn't say so. For one, a number of those same questions are still left vague by the end, so it's not like the entire experience is ruined at all. Second, I'd argue that the answers we do get are satisfying on their own merits, adding up with what was established in the canon and feeling appropriate for the story. Third, it contributes to what I think is the biggest advantage the show has. Because it takes the time to provide other perspectives on everything that happens, it manages to make all the characters feel even more nuanced and complex than they may have come off as in the books, as well as taking this as an opportunity to flesh out the universe in a way that the original source material didn't. This is what I mean when I say that changes can actually be a benefit. The show utilizes the visual medium to its advantage when it comes to doling out the narrative and making it feel that much richer, not just in terms of translating the humor. And speaking of changes being a benefit, that leads us nicely to Part 3, taking the chance to improve upon the source material. As much as I can praise the overarching plot of the Unfortunate Events books and all the twists and reveals and complex themes and all that, you can tell that the whole thing wasn't all thought up from the get go. Daniel Handler has said in interviews that he wishes he would have come up with the secret organization stuff sooner, and I won't lie, it does come across in the reading. The most telltale sign of this is the symbol for VFD, the organization in question. Earlier on, we get the idea that the tattoo on Olaf's ankle seems to follow the orphans everywhere they go, and in Book the Fourth, they encounter a building that they claim to be shaped exactly like said tattoo. As if the descriptions weren't enough, we have an illustration giving us exactly what it's supposed to look like, just a regular eye. It isn't until Book the Ninth that we get another look at what the symbol is, and we can see it's been retconned to look like this, something that kind of resembles an eye at first glance, but upon further inspection is a carefully hidden depiction of the letters VFD. Now, retcons in and of themselves aren't necessarily a bad thing. It gives the writers a chance to fix a mistake they had made earlier, and it can broaden the scope of what they can do with the story or characters. At the same time, however, it does end up giving way to lack of consistency. While they often don't outright ruin the story you're experiencing, it inevitably makes it feel less cohesive than it would otherwise. Remember earlier when I said that the Unfortunate Events film should have waited until all the books were done so they would know where the whole thing was going? The Netflix show has that benefit and takes full advantage of it. Not only does it adopt the correct VFD symbol right out the gate, but by making the VFD aspect much more prominent from the get-go, it takes advantage of this being in the format of a serialized TV show meant for streaming. You not only get a faithful adaptation of the original books, but a bigger story arc on top of it, filled with teases and cliffhangers of its own to keep you hooked to the very end. This is also helped by the fact that Daniel Handler himself was heavily involved in the production of the show. With him wishing he had the VFD stuff in earlier, you could potentially see the Netflix show as a reboot of sorts, a chance for him to tell the story in a different medium while ensuring that plot holes and continuity errors are patched up. It's rare that you get an adaptation where all the stars seem to align on that front, and this series is made all the better for it. And when you pair up Handler's involvement with the show providing canon answers to a lot of questions, one could reasonably argue that the Netflix show is the canon version. How many adaptations can you think of with that kind of distinction? Plus, as a bonus, it realizes that the book's portrayal of Olaf's henchman of ambiguous gender isn't exactly kosher in this day and age. Am I allowed to say that? The author is Jewish, so is that offensive? And so, in place of the silent, growly portrayal there, the henchman has a much more defined personality and is the one among Olaf's troop that has the most of a moral compass, which makes their interactions with Olaf even funnier. So, yes, this version is also more progressive. Right wing media grifters can suck it. So, okay, in practically every way, this show absolutely nails the tone, aesthetic, story, characters, humor, and themes of the source material. But there's another aspect of the adaptation process that I don't see people discussing all too often, and it's one that I think is very important, and that is Part 4, appealing to non-fans too. Sad as it is, not everyone out there has read the books or even know the full extent of what goes on in them. This is the case with all adaptations, whether we like it or not, and while making sure the fans of the source material are satisfied is important, it helps to also be a good work in its own right. The story should be accessible to everyone without relying on them just knowing things from the books, something the Harry Potter movies are guilty of. Get the essential ideas across without them getting lost in translation. Make sure any fan service that's thrown in isn't too distracting for those that aren't in the know, and ideally, entice those who haven't experienced the source material to give it a shot. Netflix's Unfortunate Events checks off all those boxes. By the time the show premiered its first season, the books had ended over a decade prior, so the hype train behind them had essentially died down. The crew were smart enough to realize that potential newcomers would be more likely nowadays than before, and so it knows to dole out exactly what it needs to. No one needs to worry about being lost by a random element thrown in without explanation, and I always appreciate when an adaptation is able to do that. This even amounts to the little bits of fan service they do work in. Thanks in part to the line delivery in this series being typically dry, any sly references to VFD or statements like, if there's nothing there, what was that noise, are delivered very casually, as if it's just casual conversation. Whenever a character says words with the VFD initials, those who are familiar with what that means can have that extra bit of satisfaction to themselves, but if you aren't, it's something you'll only really notice on a rewatch of the show. This is a level of cleverness that I can respect. On top of all that, even putting aside how it is as an adaptation, it's just a fantastic show on its own. It has basically everything you could want: a unique and captivating visual aesthetic, a tone that knows how to strike a balance between the serious and the goofy, multi-layered characters that all have a dark undercurrent to them, and that's when they're at their kindest, an overarching story that will keep you hooked from start to finish, complex and even thought-provoking ideas regarding morality and the importance of literature, a meta approach that never fails to amuse and takes the medium of TV show to its full advantage, and a top it all off, an excellent soundtrack. Yeah, the books don't have song numbers per se, but let's be real. If anyone in this universe were to have song numbers just to boost his own ego, it would be Olaf. The flawless use of Neil Patrick Harris for the songs is just the cherry on top. Part 5. Yeah, it's peak fiction. Staying up to date with each season of Netflix's A Series of Unfortunate Events as they dropped was one hell of an experience I'm glad to say I was there for, and revisiting it all these years later has only reignited my adoration for this franchise. As you might have been able to tell, I've been trying to keep this video as spoiler-free as possible, only making light references to things whenever necessary. That's because whether you're going with the original books or the Netflix version, I don't want to ruin too much of what you'd be in for. Whichever version you pick, you're in for a hell of a time, both delightfully morbid and morbidly delightful. At the end of the day, I really do have to credit Daniel Handler, Barry Sonnenfeld, and the people at Netflix that caused this show to happen in the first place. The fact that Barry had his movie version screwed over by studio interference only to be able to create his own version with much more creative freedom that also does proper justice to such a fantastic book series is amazing and even downright inspiring. I'm not sure if there will ever be another take on this story, but if this does end up being the last iteration we see of it, I'd be happy. The originals are always going to be there no matter what, and while the movie version has its share of problems, it's still one that I hold some level of nostalgia for. And in the end, we also have the Netflix show, which, for all the reasons I've stated in this video, is a near perfect adaptation. This has been Lexi the Lorekeeper, and now, time to work on something just a bit bigger. If you're watching this ending sequence, this means that you have chosen to ignore my advice and watch the review despite my warnings. Now, I do not know you, so I'm not sure if I should commend you for your bravery or be worried about your current mental state. Either way, this means that you, like Lexi, have taken the first step into her journey of becoming a YouTuber. I'm sorry to say, it only gets worse from here. Now, I imagine that there are three types of people currently watching. The first is the type that is wondering whether citrusy Snicker Snack is going to begin and end every episode of this series, to which I have to say, you'll just have to wait and see. The second is the type that have taken note of all the times Lexi said books, adaptation, and Netflix in this video, and have decided to make a drinking game out of it. To which I advise you to please choose a non-alcoholic drink, as I do not wish to be held responsible for any potential alcohol poisoning or hangovers, a word which here means splitting headaches you get in the morning because you just couldn't stop chugging the bottle. This is soda. The third is the type that is curious as to where this story goes from here, to which I must reiterate my prior warnings about upcoming despair and anguish. As I document Lexi's life in real time, I am perpetually compelled to make this information known to the wider world, but you are under no such obligation to make yourself privy to it, and are free to indulge in something far more pleasant. To my kind editor, as I write to you, I am hiding inside Lexi's air vents as I record her mental well-being during her first retrospective series. It is my solemn duty to get down everything I can, and I need your help in making sure my findings are depicted as closely as possible. On the third Thursday of June, go to the local theater and get a ticket for Pixar's Elio. At around the half-hour mark, reach under your chair and grab the package left for you. Inside, you will find a copy of my currently in progress account of the event, titled The Mysterious Lore of Gravity Falls, along with a replica of Journal Number 3, a graphic novel sequel, a choose your own adventure book hiding a secret, and the account after the fact by a top hat wearing triangle. There is also a collection of various ciphers useful for decoding, which proved especially useful in Lexi's work. Remember, you are my last hope that the tales of Lexi the Lorekeeper can finally be told to the general public. With all due respect, Citrusy Snicker Snack.